Picture this. It's 1970, and the American muscle car war is at its peak. Detroit's factories are churning out fire-breathing monsters, but none command attention quite like the Plymouth Hemi Cuda, a car so bold, so unapologetically brutal in design, that even today, it makes modern supercars look tame by comparison. With its menacing shark-nose grille, wide, aggressive stance, and that legendary 426 Hemi V8 poking through the shaker hood, the Cuda wasn't just a car, it was a statement. But here's the ironic twist. Despite its reputation as one of the most fearsome muscle cars ever built, the Hemi Cuda wasn't exactly a speed demon by today's standards. In fact, with a 0 to 60 miles per hour time of around 5.6 seconds, it's slower than a 2024 Ford Mustang EcoBoost. So why does this car still sell for millions at auctions? Because the Cuda wasn't just about raw speed, it was about theater, presence, and the sheer audacity of American engineering. Let's break it down. Under that long, sculpted hood sat the 426 Hemi, a 7.0-liter V8 that produced 425 horsepower, a staggering number for 1970. But here's the catch. Gross horsepower ratings back then were measured without accessories like alternators or air filters, meaning real-world output was lower. Plus, the Cuda weighed a hefty 3,900 pounds, which combined with primitive bias-ply tires, meant it couldn't put all that power down efficiently. Yet, none of that mattered when you fired it up. The Hemi's roar was unlike anything else, a deep, earth-shaking growl that announced your arrival a block away. And then there was the styling, bold stripes, a pistol grip shifter, and that iconic billboard rear graphics that screamed, "I don't care about fuel economy." But the real magic of the Cuda wasn't just in its specs, it was in its cultural impact. This was the car that dominated drag strips, starred movies, and became the ultimate poster car for a generation. Even today, spotting a real Hemi Cuda is like seeing a rock star on wheels. It doesn't need to outrun a modern performance car to steal the spotlight. Because while today's machines are built for precision and efficiency, the Cuda was built for adrenaline, rebellion, and pure, unfiltered cool. And that's why, half a century later, it's still the king of slow-moving legends. Picture this. It's 1970, and the American muscle car war is at its peak. Detroit's factories are churning out fire-breathing monsters, but none command attention quite like the Plymouth Hemi Cuda, a car so bold, so unapologetically brutal in design, that even today, it makes modern supercars look tame by comparison. With its menacing shark-nose grille, wide, aggressive stance, and that legendary 426 Hemi V8 poking through the shaker hood, the Cuda wasn't just a car, it was a statement. But here's the ironic twist. Despite its reputation as one of the most fearsome muscle cars ever built, the Hemi Cuda wasn't exactly a speed demon by today's standards. In fact, with a 0 to 60 miles per hour time of around 5.6 seconds, it's slower than a 2024 Ford Mustang EcoBoost. So why does this car still sell for millions at auctions? Because the Cuda wasn't just about raw speed, it was about theater, presence, and the sheer audacity of American engineering. Let's break it down. Under that long, sculpted hood sat the 426 Hemi, a 7.0-liter V8 that produced 425 horsepower, a staggering number for 1970. But here's the catch. Gross horsepower ratings back then were measured without accessories like alternators or air filters, meaning real-world output was lower. Plus, the Cuda weighed a hefty 3,900 pounds, which combined with primitive bias-ply tires, meant it couldn't put all that power down efficiently. Yet, none of that mattered when you fired it up. The Hemi's roar was unlike anything else, a deep, earth-shaking growl that announced your arrival a block away. And then there was the styling, bold stripes, a pistol grip shifter, and that iconic billboard rear graphics that screamed, "I don't care about fuel economy." But the real magic of the Cuda wasn't just in its specs, it was in its cultural impact. This was the car that dominated drag strips, starred movies, and became the ultimate poster car for a generation. Even today, spotting a real Hemi Cuda is like seeing a rock star on wheels. It doesn't need to outrun a modern performance car to steal the spotlight. Because while today's machines are built for precision and efficiency, the Cuda was built for adrenaline, rebellion, and pure, unfiltered cool. And that's why, half a century later, it's still the king of slow-moving legends. When the screaming chicken on the hood of the 1973 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am spread its wings across America's silver screens in Smokey and the Bandit, it didn't just create a movie star. It birthed a cultural phenomenon that would define an entire generation's idea of cool. This was the muscle car that somehow managed to be both outlaw and hero. A machine that looked fast standing still even as emission-strangled engines struggled to deliver on that promise. The 73 Trans Am represented peak 1970s automotive drama. Those flared fenders wide enough to land aircraft, the shaker hood scoop that seemed to breathe with a car's soul, and that iconic Phoenix decal that wasn't so much a badge as a battle cry. Underneath all that theater sat a 455 Super Duty V8 that, on paper, should have been terrifying. Except by 1973, the combination of new emissions controls and the switch to net horsepower ratings meant it produced just 250 horsepower, a far cry from its 310 horsepower 1971 predecessor. The result? A 0 to 60 miles per hour time hovering around 7 seconds, barely quicker than a modern family SUV. But here's the beautiful paradox. Nobody who slid behind the wheel of a 73 Trans Am cared about stopwatch numbers, because from the moment you turned the key, this car wasn't about measured performance. It was about unmeasured attitude. The genius of the 73 Trans Am lay in how completely it committed to its persona. Pontiac's designers understood something fundamental about the changing 1970s muscle car market. If you couldn't give buyers earth-scorching power anymore, you'd give them earth-scorching style instead. The cockpit was pure fighter jet fantasy, with a hood-mounted tachometer, a formula steering wheel thick enough to wrestle, and seats that hugged you like a wrestling partner. That famous shaker hood wasn't just for show. It actually trembled with the engine's vibrations at idle, a constant physical reminder of the power, however diminished, lurking beneath. The exhaust note had been carefully tuned to produce a specific snarl between 2,000 and 3,000 RPM, right where most drivers cruise through town, ensuring maximum aural impact at minimum speed. Even the rear spoiler, which looked radical enough to belong on a Daytona race car, was functional at highway speeds, pressing the rear wheels down with genuine downforce. This was a car that understood its audience perfectly. Young Americans who still wanted to feel rebellious even as the golden age of muscle faded, who needed their cars to be loud, brash statements in an increasingly quiet, conformist world. What makes the 73 Trans Am so eternally compelling isn't just its Hollywood connections or even its stunning looks. It's how perfectly it represents that moment when Detroit automakers had to get creative. With raw power slipping away, they doubled down on theater, on emotion, on pure driving experience. Sliding behind the wheel of one today, you're immediately struck by how mechanical everything feels. The heavy clutch pedal, the notchy Hurst shifter, the way the entire car shudders to life like a waking beast. The steering is unassisted, meaning every turn is a bicep workout, and those wide tires follow every groove in the pavement. It's not fast by modern standards, but it's alive in a way few contemporary cars can match. That's why Trans Ams from this era have become so coveted. They represent the last gasp of pure, unadulterated American automotive personality, before computers and regulations smoothed all the rough edges off performance cars. When you see one today parked proudly at a car show or rumbling down a back road, it's not nostalgia you feel. It's recognition that some machines transcend their specifications to become something greater. That true cool can't be measured in horsepower or 0 to 60 times, but in the stories they inspire and the hearts they capture. The 73 Trans Am didn't just survive the death of true muscle cars. It outran them in our collective memory, becoming immortal not because of what it was, but because of how it made us feel. The 1974 Dodge Charger SE represented a radical reinvention of American muscle, one that traded raw aggression for velvet-lined sophistication, proving that even in the darkest days of the oil crisis, Detroit could still produce cars that made pulses race. This wasn't the stripped-down, lightweight dragstrip terror of 1968. This was a personal luxury coupe draped in opera windows and Corinthian leather, a grand tourer for the disco era that just happened to pack a 360 cubic inch V8 under its dramatically sloping hood. The transformation was shocking to purists. Gone were the Charger's trademark Coke bottle curves, replaced by a sleek, almost European fastback profile punctuated by a massive egg crate grille and hidden headlights that gave it an air of mysterious elegance. But here's what made the 74 Charger special. Well, its 245 horsepower engine, a far cry from the 425 horsepower monsters of just 4 years prior, meant it took a leisurely 8.5 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour. Dodge's engineers had worked minor miracles to make it feel faster than it was. The suspension was tuned for buttery smoothness rather than neck-snapping launches. The steering was light and precise, and the interior, that interior, was a plush wonderland of rich vinyl, real wood grain, and thick pile carpeting, so deep you could lose your keys in it. This was a muscle car that had grown up, traded its denim jacket for a three-piece suit, and discovered the joys of air conditioning and AM/FM stereo with 8-track player. What the 74 Charger lacked in straight-line fury, it made up for in sheer presence. That long, sloping roofline gave it a silhouette unlike anything else on American roads, while the optional rally package added bold body side stripes and road-hugging suspension that at least hinted at performance credentials. The real magic happened at night, when those hidden headlights would dramatically flip up with an electric whir, transforming the car's face from sleek anonymity to aggressive readiness. Inside, the cockpit-style dashboard wrapped around the driver with aircraft-inspired gauges, while the console-mounted shifter for the optional Torque Flight Automatic fell perfectly to hand. This was a car designed for cross-country cruising in style, the kind of machine you'd take from Los Angeles to Las Vegas with the windows down and the 8-track blaring Elvis, arriving without a hair out of place. The 360 V8 might have been strangled by emissions controls, but it still delivered torque in smooth, effortless waves, perfect for effortless highway passing or showing off at the drive-in. The 74 Charger SE's true legacy lies in how perfectly it adapted to its times. While earlier muscle cars were brash teenagers, this was a sophisticated adult, one that understood the realities of 1974 gas lines, speed limits, insurance premiums, but refused to surrender its soul. Today, these cars are often overlooked in favor of their more powerful ancestors. But that's missing the point. The 74 Charger wasn't about quarter-mile times. It was about making an entrance, about proving that American automakers could still create cars dripping with personality, even in the face of crisis. When you see one now, maybe at a classic car show parked between more obviously muscular machines, take a closer look. Notice how the sunlight plays across that fastback roofline, how the opera windows give the interior a cathedral-like quality, how the whole car seems to whisper rather than shout its intentions. This was Detroit's answer to the question, what comes after muscle? A car that traded fire-breathing rage for cool, calculated swagger, and in doing so, became something perhaps even more special, a time capsule of an era when survival meant reinvention, and style could sometimes triumph over speed. The 1975 Chevrolet Camaro LT arrived like the last flare of a fading fireworks show, still brilliant enough to catch your eye, but dimming under the weight of emissions regulations and America's shifting automotive priorities. This wasn't the snarling Z/28 of 1969 that could peel pavement with its rear tires. This was a more sophisticated, slightly subdued version that wrapped its muscle car DNA in a velour-trimmed package perfect for cruising past discotheques rather than drag strips. The second-generation Camaro's sleek, European-inspired body lines, so radically different from the first-gen's squared-off aggression, now featured a pronounced pointed nose, wraparound rear glass, and an overall profile that looked fast standing still. But beneath that gorgeous sheet metal lay a harsh reality. The top engine option was now a 155 horsepower, 350 cubic inch V8 that needed nearly 9 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour, making it slower than many modern economy cars. Yet here's the fascinating paradox. The 75 Camaro LT might have been down on power, but it was swimming in style, offering an intoxicating blend of luxury and latent performance that made it the perfect car for its tumultuous era. The interior was a revelation compared to earlier muscle cars, with plush high-back bucket seats, a sweeping dashboard that put all controls within easy reach, and available options like power windows and a rear defogger that catered to comfort-conscious buyers. The suspension had been refined for better road manners. The steering was precise if not particularly communicative, and the overall driving experience felt more mature than the raw-boned Camaros of just a few years prior. What made the 75 Camaro LT special wasn't what it had lost, but what it had gained in sophistication. The optional Rally Sport package added a distinctive split front bumper and hideaway headlights that gave the car an almost exotic appearance, while the Type LT trim, luxury touring, brought upgraded upholstery, sound insulation, and wood grain accents that elevated it beyond typical pony car fare. Driving one today reveals how carefully Chevrolet balanced performance and comfort. The small block V8 might have been strangled by smog equipment, but it still delivered torque in smooth, linear waves perfect for highway cruising, accompanied by a muted but purposeful exhaust note. The unibody construction felt solid and rattle-free compared to earlier muscle cars, while the available 3-speed automatic transmission shifted with butter-smooth precision. This was a car designed for the real world of 1975, where $1 per gallon gasoline still seemed expensive and the national speed limit had been reduced to 55 miles per hour, a world where showing up in style mattered more than winning stoplight duels. The 75 Camaro LT's enduring appeal lies in how perfectly it captured that mid-70s moment when American car culture was in transition. Parked next to its 1969 predecessor, it looks like a different species, sleeker, more worldly, less overtly aggressive. Yet there's an undeniable charm to its disco-era aesthetic, from the optional swiveling bucket seats to the rally wheels that filled the wheel wells just right. Today, these second-gen Camaros are finally getting their due as collectibles, appreciated not for earth-shaking performance, but for representing the last gasp of true American style before the malaise era fully took hold. When you slide behind the wheel of a well-preserved 75 LT, you're not just driving a car, you're experiencing a specific moment in time when muscle cars were evolving to survive, trading some brute force for daily drivability, and in the process, creating something perhaps more interesting. Vehicles that balance performance and luxury in ways their predecessors never imagined. The 1975 Camaro LT whispers rather than shouts its intentions, but sometimes, as any disco fan knows, the most memorable moments come not from the loudest beats, but from the perfect groove. When the 1976 AMC Pacer X rolled onto the scene, with its bubble-like silhouette and radical wide-body design, it didn't just challenge conventional notions of American muscle, it completely shattered them, creating a cult phenomenon that remains polarizing to this day. This wasn't some recycled Detroit iron with a big engine shoved under the hood. This was a spaceship that had crash-landed in the middle of the muscle car era, boasting the widest body of any production car in America, 77 inches, wider than a Cadillac Eldorado, and more glass area than a greenhouse, giving it an otherworldly presence that made every other car on the road look instantly dated. The Pacer X variant tried valiantly to inject some performance credibility into this unlikely package with sporty decals, a semi-functional hood scoop, and a 258 cubic inch inline-six that produced, well, let's call it an adequate 120 horsepower, good for a 0 to 60 miles per hour time that could best be described as eventual. But here's the brilliant paradox. The Pacer X wasn't about raw speed, clearly. It was about radical thinking, about what happened when an underdog automaker looked at the dying muscle car scene and decided to reinvent it entirely. The driving experience was unlike anything else from the era. That expansive windshield provided a view of the road that felt more like an IMAX theater than a car. The wide track gave it surprising stability in corners, and the unique passenger side door that was 4 inches longer than the driver's side to ease rear seat access showed AMC's quirky commitment to innovation. Inside, the Pacer X offered a surprisingly upscale environment with available leather seats, a sports steering wheel, and an optional glamour kit that included crushed velour upholstery and special lighting. Because if you're going to drive the automotive equivalent of a disco ball, you might as well go all in. What made the Pacer X truly special was how perfectly it embodied the mid-70s zeitgeist, a time when automakers were throwing ideas at the wall to see what would stick after the muscle car golden age had ended. AMC's designers had envisioned the Pacer as the car of the future, with features like a built-in roll cage hidden under the padding, doors that extended into the roof for easier entry/exit, and enough interior space to theoretically fit a 55-gallon drum, a fact AMC proudly advertised. The X package added just enough sporty pretense to make it appealing to younger buyers who wanted to stand out. The bold graphics, blacked-out trim, and rally wheels gave it an aggressive edge that played wonderfully against its otherwise friendly, bug-eyed appearance. Driving one today is an exercise in cognitive dissonance. The upright seating position feels more SUV than sports car. The six-cylinder engine's modest output requires careful planning for passing maneuvers, but the sheer novelty of the experience makes up for any performance shortcomings. That wide stance gives it planted handling, the light steering makes it effortless to maneuver, and the turning circle is tight enough to make parking this spaceship surprisingly easy. The Pacer X's legacy lies in its fearless weirdness. It represented the exact moment when American automakers realized they couldn't keep building the same old muscle cars, and AMC's response was to build something completely, gloriously different. Today, these cars attract attention wherever they go, not because they're powerful or rare, but because they represent a road not taken, a bold experiment in automotive design that prioritized imagination over horsepower. When you see a well-preserved Pacer X at a car show today, surrounded by more conventional muscle cars, notice how crowds still gather around it, drawn by its undeniable charisma and the stories it inspires. The 1976 AMC Pacer X proves that true automotive cool can't be measured in quarter-mile times or horsepower figures. Sometimes it's about having the courage to be different, to create something so boldly unconventional that nearly 50 years later, people are still talking about it. In an era when most muscle cars were fading away quietly, the Pacer went out with a bang, or more accurately, with a funky, wide-bodied, glass-covered, velour-lined, utterly unforgettable pop culture explosion. The 1977 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray stood as a defiant middle finger to the malaise era, a shining beacon of American performance in a sea of emissions-choked mediocrity. While other muscle cars had either disappeared or transformed into bloated shadows of their former selves, the C3 Corvette clung stubbornly to its performance roots. Even if its 210 horsepower L82 350 V8 represented just a fraction of the power that had roared from Corvette engines a decade earlier. This was the year the Stingray got its groove back, the fiberglass body shed some weight, the chassis gained much-needed rigidity, and the iconic fastback design, with its dramatic curves and flying buttress rear pillars, looked more exotic than anything from Italy. Sure, the 0 to 60 miles per hour time of 6.8 seconds wouldn't scare any European supercars. But when you dropped the removable T-top roof panels and fired up that small block V8, none of that mattered. The experience was pure American theater. The way the hood seemed to stretch forever before you, how the 4-speed manual shifter snicked precisely through the gates, the symphony of mechanical sounds from the rear-mounted differential that reminded you this was a machine, not an appliance. Chevrolet knew exactly what Corvette buyers wanted in 1977. Not the fastest car in the world, but the most exciting one they could still buy with American dollars. The interior mixed space age with luxury, featuring a wraparound cockpit design with aircraft-style switches, optional leather seats that hugged you through corners, and that quintessential Corvette feature, a tachometer redlined at a heady 5,500 RPM, placed front and center where God intended. What made the 77 Stingray special wasn't just what it was, but what it represented. Proof that Detroit could still produce thrilling cars despite the regulatory apocalypse. The L82 engine might have been down on power compared to its ancestors, but it delivered its 210 horsepower with a velvety smoothness and tractability that made it a joy to rev. The revised suspension geometry gave the car sharper turn-in than previous C3 models, while the quicker steering ratio, now just 2.5 turns lock-to-lock, made the big Vette feel surprisingly nimble. Out on the open road, the Corvette came alive, the exhaust note building to a glorious crescendo, the chassis communicating every ripple in the pavement, the unassisted steering delivering feedback modern electric systems can only dream of replicating. This was a car designed for the newly imposed 55 miles per hour speed limit to feel like 100, where the sensory experience mattered more than the numbers on paper. Chevrolet even offered a silver anniversary edition to celebrate the Corvette's 25th birthday, featuring two-tone silver paint and special badging that made an already head-turning car into a rolling piece of automotive jewelry. The 77 Corvette's true genius lay in its ability to make drivers feel like heroes despite the performance limitations of the era. Sliding behind the wheel today, You're immediately struck by how analog everything feels: the heavy clutch pedal, the mechanical click of the HVAC controls, the way the entire car seems to vibrate with potential energy at idle. Modern sports cars may be faster, but they'll never replicate the visceral thrill of piloting a C3 Stingray down a twisting back road. That big V8 bellowing behind you as you work the unassisted steering through each curve. The sight lines over those dramatic fenders, the smell of a leather-wrapped shifter, the way the rear end would just begin to step out when you got greedy with the throttle. These were the moments that made Corvette ownership special in 1977. When you see one now, parked proudly at a Cars and Coffee event, notice how people still crowd around it, drawn by those dramatic lines and the promise of old-school American performance. The 1977 Corvette Stingray wasn't just fighting to survive the malaise era. It was proving that even in dark times, the flame of American automotive passion could still burn bright. The 1978 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am didn't just arrive on the scene. It exploded into America's consciousness like a guitar solo at a sold-out stadium, dripping with enough attitude to make up for what it lacked in pure horsepower. This was the year the Trans Am became a full-blown cultural icon, thanks largely to a little movie called Smokey and the Bandit, where Burt Reynolds' black and gold T/A slid into the nation's psyche and never left. With its screaming Phoenix decal stretching across the hood like a battle cry, those menacing honeycomb wheels, and a shaker scoop that trembled with every blip of the throttle, the 78 Trans Am was pure automotive theater. Under the hood, the reality was less dramatic. The once mighty 400 cubic inch V8 had been replaced by a 220 horsepower 6.6-liter, 403 cubic inch Oldsmobile engine in most models, while the rare W72 400ci Pontiac motor, now the last true Pontiac V8, mustered just 220 horsepower, a far cry from the fire-breathing monsters of 1970. But here's the magic trick Pontiac pulled off. They made it feel faster than it was. The exhaust note was tuned for maximum drama. The suspension was stiff enough to make every pothole feel like a performance event, and the 4-speed manual transmission or the optional 3-speed automatic delivered power with enough shove to at least pretend this was still the golden age of muscle. What set the 78 Trans Am apart wasn't just its looks, though my God, those looks, but how perfectly it embodied late 70s American car culture. This was a machine built for cruising the strip, for parking lot posing, for making an entrance at the drive-in. The cockpit was pure rock and roll fantasy, a formula steering wheel thick enough to wrestle, gauges that glowed like a jukebox at night, and those iconic chicken head knobs for the ventilation controls. The seats were upholstered in either velour or optional leather, with enough lateral support to keep you planted during spirited driving, or at least during enthusiastic lane changes. Pontiac even offered a special performance package with a W72 engine, functional hood scoops, and a dual snorkel air cleaner that gave the car a faint whiff of its high-performance heritage. On the road, the Trans Am was more show pony than racehorse. The steering was heavy but vague, the brakes required serious leg muscle, and the sheer weight of all that steel and glass meant acceleration was more steady pull than neck snapping. But none of that mattered when you were idling at a red light, the shaker scoop quivering as the loping cam sent vibrations through the entire car, drawing stares from every pedestrian within earshot. The 78 Trans Am's legacy isn't measured in quarter-mile times or top speeds. It's measured in cultural impact. This was the car that made teenagers plaster their bedroom walls with centerfold posters. The car that turned gas stations into impromptu car shows every time one pulled in for a fill-up. Today, well-preserved 78 T/as are among the most sought-after cars of the era, not because they're particularly fast, but because they're alive in a way modern cars simply can't replicate. Slide behind the wheel of one now, and you're immediately transported back to 1978, the smell of the vinyl, the mechanical clunk of the T-tops being removed, the way the entire dashboard seems to vibrate in harmony with the engine at idle. Driving one is an exercise in sensory overload. The unassisted steering communicates every bump in the road. The exhaust note changes from a grumble to a bellow as the secondaries kick in, and the rearview mirror fills with nothing but that soaring rear spoiler. It's not just transportation. It's a time machine to an era when cars had personalities as big as their hood decals, when performance was more about feeling than figures, and when driving a Trans Am didn't just mean you owned a car, it meant you owned the road. The 1978 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am wasn't the last muscle car standing at the end of the 70s. It was the last one strutting, all the way into automotive immortality. The 1979 Ford Mustang 5.0 wasn't just a car. It was Detroit's first real declaration that the muscle car wasn't dead, just hibernating, waiting for the right moment to shake off the shackles of emissions regulations and gasoline crises. This was the year the Mustang grew up, shed its Pinto-based origins, and evolved into the Fox body platform that would become legendary, though nobody knew it yet. With its sharp angular lines that looked like they'd been drawn with a ruler, because they practically were, the '79 Mustang presented a radically modern take on the pony car formula. The top-tier 5.0-liter V8 pumped out a modest 140 horsepower in its first iteration, pathetic by 1969 standards, but downright heroic in 1979, delivering a 0 to 60 miles per hour time of about 9 seconds that felt faster thanks to the lightweight chassis and the V8's throaty exhaust note. What made this Mustang special wasn't raw power, though the 5.0 badge on the fender hinted at greater things to come, but how it handled. The new rack and pinion steering was precise. The suspension was tuned for actual cornering rather than straight-line stability, and the whole package weighed hundreds of pounds, less than the bloated Mustang it replaced. This was a car that reminded drivers that fun didn't have to come with six-figure horsepower numbers. It could be found in the way the tail would wag under braking, how the engine would bellow when you wound it out to its 5,500 RPM redline, or how perfectly the optional T-tops stored in the trunk for instant open-air motoring. Ford's designers understood something crucial in 1979. The muscle car needed reinvention, not just nostalgia. The cockpit featured a driver-focused layout with clear analog gauges, including an optional tachometer that actually worked, a center console that put the shifter within perfect reach, and seats that offered real support during spirited driving. The exterior design mixed European influences with American muscle. The flush headlights, integrated bumpers, and fastback roofline gave it a modern edge, while the optional Cobra package added aggressive decals and a rear spoiler that hinted at performance potential. Driving one today reveals how right Ford got the basics. The clutch pedal has just the right weight, the shifter moves through its gates with mechanical precision, and the lightweight body, just 2,800 pounds, makes every horsepower count double. That 5.0-liter V8 might have been strangled by smog equipment, but it still delivered torque in a smooth, linear wave that made city driving effortless and highway merging drama-free. This was a car built for the real world of 1979, where speed limits were low, gas prices were high, but the urge to drive something exciting hadn't disappeared. The '79 Mustang 5.0's true significance lies in what it represented: the first step back toward real performance after a decade of retreat. When you see one now, parked between more powerful modern Mustangs at a car show, notice how people still gravitate toward it. They're drawn not just by nostalgia, but by the purity of its design. No computers, no traction control, just a simple, lightweight rear-wheel drive platform with a V8 up front. The Fox body Mustang would go on to become a performance icon throughout the 1980s, but it all started here, in 1979, with this unassuming yet revolutionary redesign. Slide behind the wheel today, and you'll discover something remarkable. This car feels alive in a way modern performance cars often don't. The steering talks to you. The chassis communicates every bump and ripple in the pavement, and that small block V8 sings a mechanical symphony no turbocharged four-cylinder can replicate. The 1979 Mustang 5.0 wasn't the fastest muscle car America ever built, but it might be one of the most important. The bridge between the malaise era and the performance renaissance that was just around the corner. It proved that even in Detroit's darkest days, the spirit of American muscle couldn't be extinguished, just waiting for the right moment to roar back to life.